Institute and to Professor Wolf and to the British School for the kind invitation here. I presented this study for the first time precisely in the British School at Rome a few years ago. And now I hope you can appreciate my perfect Italian pronunciation. Light?
That's all right?
That's all right.
You can see your script.
Yes, I can read. On the Esquiline Hill in Rome, on a spring day in 1506, Signor de Fredis was working in his vineyard. The day before, his workmen had been digging a pit to seek water, but found none. Signor de Fredis stood by it and asked himself whether it was not a pity that so much earth had been thrown out, and whether it could not be utilized in the vineyard. He felt about with his stick in the upper part of the pit to ascertain how deep the soil was. The stick sank in the earth up to its handle without meeting with any resistance. There must be a hollow under the ground, he said to himself. He first thought of calling the workmen, but since it was better to make the discovery himself, he took a mattock and spade and set to work. By noon, he had made a hole large enough to get through, but since it was pitch black inside, he first went to fetch a lantern. Carrying this, he went down into the earth and came into a vaulted room. He went through 5 rooms and found no treasures, but in the 6th he saw a sight that startled him. 2 enormous snakes had enfolded in the coils a bearded man of heroic stature and his 2 boys. One snake had already bitten the man in the right side, and the other had bitten one of the boys in the left. The apparition was a statue of Pentelic marble, and might therefore possess as much value as a treasure. Signor de Fredis went at once to the prefect of the city, who followed him in company with the aedile and some learned antiquaries. The work of art was brought to the light and inspected. Its subject was seen to be the Trojan priest Laocoon, against whom Apollo had sent 2 snakes because he had warned his countrymen against receiving the dangerous great gift of the Trojan horse, in which warriors lay concealed. It was not an edifying story, nor a comforting one, since it illustrated the sad lot of a prophet in this world. The Romans, however, did not think of that, but treated the statue as a sign of Renaissance, a memorial of the classical period, and an omen of better times to come. Pope Julius II bought the Laocoon for the Vatican, after Michelangelo had declared it was the greatest work of art in the world, and Signor de Fredis received a pension for life. The excavation and cleaning of the statue took a considerable time, but when at least it was ready, it was decorated with flowers and carried in procession through the street of Rome, while all the church bells rang for a whole hour. This is the Laocoon by August Strindberg. In his tale, he presents an entirely imaginary but very lively reconstruction of the discovery of the famous statue group of Laocoon. Strindberg goes on to conjure up a scene of the young Martin Luther visiting Rome, who missed the joyous procession carrying the Laocoon to the Vatican. He asks a passerby which martyr could be represented as by such a revered statue, but the man laughs. Then he asks his neighbor again, "Are the church bells ringing for that?" And the latter nods. "Are the people mad?" he asks. And this time he receives the answer, "No, they are wise, but you are somewhat stupid. Probably you come from Germany. I apologize to all the Germans here present. But who was Laocoon? In a famous passage from Book 2 of the Aeneid, narrating the fall of Troy, Virgil tells us that Laocoon was a priest of Poseidon, who was killed by two giant sea serpents, along with both his sons, after attempting to expose the use of the Trojan horse by striking it with a spear. The statue portrays the precise episode narrated by Virgil, with the two serpents clutching Laocoon and his sons in a deadly embrace. The date of the discovery of the Laocoon, 1506, on the 14th of January, appears in a letter written to recount the event. The interest and curiosity which the discovery excited over 500 years ago in Rome were comparable to media events which sweep over the general public today, and the news arrived in all the courts of Europe. A few days later, on the 31st of January, Sabadino degli Arienti, an Italian humanist, author and poet, wrote to Isabella d'Este, Marchesa of Mantova, and one of the leading women of the Italian Renaissance. The letter provided her with further information about the discovery. The statue was found in the vineyard of a gentleman at a site named Le Capocce, near the church of San Pietro in Vincoli, St. Peter in Chains, in a subterranean room with a walled-up door. The Laocoon was missing its arm, and this is a topic to which we will return. The Cardinal of San Pietro in Vincoli wanted to buy it for 1,000 ducats. There was also other purchase offers, but the Pope, Julius II, exercised his right of preemption. At the end, he writes, "Everybody in Rome went to his house, the house of the owner, of course. Night and day, it was like a jubilee, and the fortunate discoverer was forced to endure an endless flow of visitors to his bedroom, where he had given shelter to the statue in order to better guard it." I think his wife was really happy with it. The statue of Laocoon soon became famous and reproduced everywhere, both as a faithful copy as the inspiration for such famous painting as El Greco, Tiziano, El Greco, and so on. This is the first copy in Florence, Paris, Madrid, and even on its move to Paris during the Napoleonic era. In Paris it was received with great demonstrations of joy, but never as much as on its return to Rome after the Treaty of Vienna. Even in Rodi and in Brazil. Perhaps due to its growing fame, 60 years after the discovery, in February 1567, a no longer young Francesco da Sangallo recalled the event when he was a child together with his father Giuliano and Michelangelo. Questo è il Laocoonte che fa menzione Plinio. This is the Laocoon which Pliny mentions, they said, looking at the discovery. They recognized the statue group as the same which Pliny the Elder mentioned as standing in the house of Titus the Emperor, considering it one of the most beautiful creations of antiquity. In fact, the fame of the work of art which accompanied the Laocoon through all of its afterlife is due not only to the magnificence of the work itself, but to the fact that it was the same masterpiece cited by Pliny. Oh, sorry. It's this. In this quote, the Latin word imperator, in Titi imperatoris domo, doesn't mean emperor, but victorious general. If Titus was the emperor, he would have been living on the Palatine Hill. Moreover, Titus became emperor only a few months before the death of Pliny during the famous Vesuvius eruption in 79 AD. We have no other literary reference, not any archaeological evidence for the Domus Titi. Pliny doesn't say where the house was. Locating it on the Oppian Hill is a later inference based solely on the actual discovery site of the Laocoon. Sorry again. Mistake in the location of the slide. But even the location of this find on the Oppian Hill, always called vigna in Italian, that is vineyard, was given rather vaguely in the contemporary letters. Near Le Capocce, that is Le Sette Sale, 7 horses, the name of the enormous reservoir built to supply the beds of Trajan. Not far from the amphitheater, the Colosseum, near the church of San Pietro in Vincoli, in a vineyard near the church of Santa Maria Maggiore, and you see the area is quite vast. Of course, we must take into account the fact that these were almost always letters sent to people outside Rome, so the reference points for the find had to be well known and easily identifiable. In the suburban landscape of Vineyard, where the statue was found in the 16th century, such points were few and far between. And this is the Knowles map of the 18th century, before the urbanization of this site. We will see often. Only Raffaele Maffei, the so-called Volterrano, reports the name of the fortunate discoverer and owner of the vineyard, Felix Civis Romanus. None of the other reports from the period mention this name. It's, however, recorded in the official document with which, in March of 1506, Pope Julius II granted him the income from the tolls of the Porta San Giovanni in exchange for the statue. The man's name is Felice de Fredis. We know also his epitaph, currently preserved in the Basilica of Santa Maria in Aracelli, near the Capitoline Hill, where it was restored at the end of the 19th century by the French family Frédy, that of the Baron Pierre Frédy de Coubertin, the founder of the Olympic Games, who claimed to be descended from him. In the year 1529, his wife, Hieronima Branca, and his daughter, Giulia, set up the epitaph to Felice and his son, Federico, both carried off by an all too early death. According to this epitaph, Felice earned immortality for the discovery of the divine effigy of Laocoon. But sometimes the collective memory is short, and while the Laocoon quickly became one of the best-known sculptural groups in the world, the memory, if not the name itself, of Felice de Fredis was lost, so much so that even today we wonder where his vineyard was located and where the Laocoon was found. As we will see, this matter is of more than antiquarian interest. The various hypotheses on the find spot can be divided into two distinct strands. A, the group wasn't found where Pliny saw it, which gives rise to two possibilities. The statue could have been moved from its original location, or the Laocoon found in 1506 was not the original seen by Pliny, but an ancient copy of it. B. According to most scholars, the group was found exactly where Pliny saw it, in the Domus Titi Imperatoris. This also leads to two possibilities. Some maintain that the domus was a part of the Domus Aurea, of which a famous pavilion is preserved on the Oppian Hill. Others locate it at other sites on the same hill. Two additional elements can help us to obtain better results. In this map, Bufalini's map, plan of Rome, dating from a time not very long after the discovery, just 50 years, behind the Greek reservoir named Sette Sale, we just heard this name here, you see the indication Domus Titi. A term which probably indicates not the remains of the domus itself, but the place where the statue was found, according to Pliny's record. And this wonderful fresco in the Vatican apartments of Pope Julius III gives a panoramic view of the eastern part of the Oppian Hill, in which the Laocoon is inserted in the Esquiline landscape, and where we can also see the Aurelian walls here, and the gates, Porta Maggiore, Porta Tiburtina, and the Trofei di Mario, and the temple of Minerva Medica, so Esquiline Hill. The sources available to now don't provide any further information. When the sources are not sufficient, the only way to advance our research is to get new sources. Given this state of affairs, the new research on the find spot of the statue group was directed towards the owner of the vineyard and the discovery of new archival documents, which, as will be seen, can provide a definitive solution to the problem. To do this, an archive expert was needed. I was lucky enough to meet Antonella Parisi, who works in the Archivio di Stato di Roma. She is an archaeologist and an expert on archives, and finally she has become a friend of mine. Thanks to our common curiosity to inquire into the past, we worked together for a few years until we came to a convincing and definitive conclusion. Our research was undertaken on a vast scale in the Sacred Archive of the Vatican, the Archivio Storico Capitolino, the Archive of San Pietro in Vincoli, and the Archive of Santa Maria Maggiore, but the most important results were obtained in the Archivio di Stato di Roma. Here are preserved the records of the College of the Capitoline Notaries, which became the focus of our research. Over 1900 volumes contain the documents registered by Rome's notaries. These represent a precious tool for this kind of investigation. The notary intervened in every act of social life, registering wills, donation, property inventories, dowries and marriages, as well as sales and rental contracts. With a bit of patience and luck, it was possible to reconstruct the life of someone who lived 500 years ago, to piece together his family relationship, to establish his social status, to insert him into a network of relationships, and, the most important thing of all, to identify his real estate properties. The first phase of our investigation consisted in perusing the indexes of names to find any mention of Felice de Fredis. In a second phase, we used a more analytic approach, leafing through the volumes page by page. This method turned out to be successful. Thanks to the archival sources, we can now say that Felice de Fredis died in 1519. In other words, 10 years before the date given in his funerary inscription. In fact, after his death, on August of 1519, the Cardinal Camerlengo Riario della Rovere decided to return to Felice's son Federico a sum of 1,700 ducats, a figure corresponding to what his father had spent as Camerarius Camerae Urbis Rome. In other words, de Fredis was a tax collector, and his delicate and responsible position led him to draw on his own finances in difficult times, that is, when the outgoings exceeded revenue. In today's Rome, tax collectors don't do this. I don't know in Britain. Maybe, yeah. The De Fredis family was related to some of the most important families in Rome. His mother, Vannozza, was the sister of Stefano in Fessura, here, the author of the Diario della Città di Roma, the diary of the city of Rome, which is considered to be the most important narrative source for the second half of the 15th century in Rome. Thanks to his marriage to Girolama Branca, Hieronima de Branca, who belonged to one of the most illustrious families in Rome, Felice de Fredis managed to further consolidate his status. His daughter Giulia married a representative of the noble family de Militibus, or the Cavalieri. Tommaso de Cavalieri was the best friend of Michelangelo, maybe you remember. Then we discovered two documents of fundamental importance. Both were written in an extremely difficult handwriting, and both were unpublished. So you see, quite difficult. The first is a purchase contract dated November 1504. Felice de Fredis purchased from the nuns of Santa Caterina da Siena a vineyard located in the area of San Pietro in Vico. The property had a total size of about 1.5 hectares and was equipped to produce wine. De Fredis paid the asking price of 135 ducats immediately and in cash, not much if compared to the advantages that he was to obtain from the purchase. The document is historically important, but it does not resolve the matter of the exact location of the vineyard. The toponym is generic, and the data relative to the neighboring properties are incomplete. Only the property of a certain Messer de Gualderonibus and the local road are mentioned. The second document turned out to be more useful. It's a contract written on March 1527. Felice de Fredis has by now been dead for 8 years. The vineyard has been rented by his widow Girolama in the name of her son Federico, who is still a minor, to the abbot of the church of San Sebastiano fuori le mura. The characteristics of the property are the same as were given in the first document. This second document, therefore, certainly refers to the same vineyard. This is demonstrated by the fact that among the boundaries, the property of Teodoro de Gualderoni appears again. A new element is the domus, or an house, apparently built by the Fredis himself. It's attractive to hypothesize that the Laocoon was found on January 14, 1506, a little more than a year after the purchase of the property, precisely when the house was being built, perhaps in the course of digging its foundations. Source: report that the statue group was found at a depth of 4 meters, and it's difficult to imagine that the discovery occurred during normal agricultural activities. The topographical indications of this document are also more informative. The vineyard is located near the Sette Sale, you remember this name, in a place called Le Capocce. Its boundaries are described without omissions. The delimiting features are the properties of Teodoro de Gualderoni, Lucrezia de Clarice, the heirs of Marco de lo Cavalletto, and finally a country route. The toponym indicates unequivocally the location of the vineyard on the Oppian Hill near the cistern of the Baths of Trajan, the Sette Sale, in a zone between the church of San Martino ai Monti and the modern Via La Bicana, in the area crossed by the local road of the Piccolo delle Sette Sale, a street which no longer exists today. This one, the red one. This ensemble of data provided new impetus to our investigation, which proceeded with the identification of all the documents relating to the properties bordering the vineyard of the Fredis. From our research, a living cross-section of 16th century Rome emerged. Here, interacted in perfect harmony tax collectors, such as the Fredis, innkeepers, merchants, and notaries, and even prostitutes of high rank. One of these was Lucrezia de Clarice, known also in the trade as vineyard of Lucrezia de Clarice, as Madrema non vole. My mother doesn't want me to, or my mother doesn't allow it. Someone says she was too young to do it, but someone says also that this is an expression probably intended to raise the price of her services. But Lucrezia is mentioned by Pietro Aretino as a high-class prostitute of a sunny and spirited disposition, educated in the works of Petrarca, Boccaccio, Virgil, Horace, and Ovid, and especially frequented by prelates. Next to Felice's property was that of a successful innkeeper, Marco de lo Cavalletto, owner of a taberna vinaria in the Rione Ponte, in the middle of the town. And this is the location. You see the Knowles map with the vineyard and the name of the owners of the properties. On the other side was the vineyard of a highly respectable notary, Teodoro de Gualderoni. You remember his name. Here is license by Teodoro de Gualderoni to make excavations in the search of archaeological discoveries in his vineyards. On the basis of cross-reference comparisons, adding piece to piece, we were able to solve the puzzle of how all the properties in the area fit together. For our base map, we used the plan of Giovan Battista Nolli. This is the first map created with an azimuthal projection, and it can therefore be superimposed over a modern map. The result of the work was surprising. The vineyard of Felice de Fredis lay to the east of the Cister, between the ancient Vicolo delle Sette Sale, which bordered it, and the modern Via Merulana. All the hypotheses which placed it in the area of the Baths of Trajan and of the Domus Aurea can now be refuted, thanks to the precious and impartial contribution made by the maps and the documents. Regarding to the modern topography of Rome, we are in the area immediately behind the Sette Sale to the east, in a district now completely urbanized and profoundly different from the panorama of vineyards preserved until the end of the 19th century. Incredibly, however, besides the unmistakable profile of the Sette Sale reservoir in the modern urban fabric, there survives one other vestige. Inside the area, there is perfectly visible and well preserved the structure present on Nolli's plan with the characteristic L shape. And so there arises the fascinating hypothesis that this is the domus built by the Fredis and attested in the document of 1527. Today, the building stands practically intact on the property of the Sisters of Cluny, inside the courtyard of the late 19th century buildings, which lie at a level more than 3 meters below, you see, the foundation of the house. This is the same difference in levels that is still easily recognizable by looking at the neighboring Via Mecenate, with its high retaining walls to the left and to the right, here the Sette Sale and here the Sister of Cluny. It's also attested by the excavation reports from the period. The original level was here. So you see the archaeological map by Rodolfo Ranciani. The archaeological remains were discovered and apparently demolished at least 3 meters above the level of the new street that was being built. As can also be seen, this area is situated on a high ridge over a deep depression, you see. On the same ridge ran the ancient Roman city walls, known as the Servian walls, of which numerous stretches were found and documented in this zone during the building works undertaken at the end of the 19th century. In the northeastern part of the city, on the Esquiline Hill, the defensive function of the walls, which were generally situated on the outer edge of the hills, you see here the hills of Rome, and you see where the walls run. Here on the Esquiline, where there is no ridge, the fortification was enhanced by a wide moat on the outside and a high embankment on the inside, the Agger. You see the large moat and the embankment. Not far from here, in the courtyard of a building on the Via Mecenate, one of these sections of walls is preserved, which has recently been reclaimed and restored by the Soprintendenza Archeologica di Roma. The tract runs for around 10 meters and is 6 blocks high, although we know that at the time of its discovery there were 3 additional rows of blocks that were demolished. The height of the wall at this point brings us to the level before the modern urbanization. So you see, this is the building, and here these are the walls. In this area, outside the Republican wall, toward the modern Via Merulana, the height of the wall was emphasized by the slope of the aforementioned depression, which constitute the natural continuation of the moat of the Arger. In around 35 before Christ, Micinas created and expanded his gardens, the Orti Mecenatiani, by reclaiming land on the Esquiline, as is attested by the famous lines of Horace's satire, Nunc licet Esquiliis habitare salubribus, atque agere navigo spaziari. Now it's possible to reside on the healthy Esquiline and to take walks in the sun on the embankment. In Micinas' project, the zone immediately outside the Republican walls was reclaimed for the city by suppressing part of the Esquiline necropolis. From that moment, the Ager, that is the embankment and the walls themselves, became an ideal place to take a walk. Regions like these, precisely because of their height, were used not only for the erection of defensive walls, but also for the passage of aqueducts, which ran at high levels. It's certain that an aqueduct branch passed through this area, at least by the Trojanic period, when several million liters of water were needed to supply the system of the Sette Sale. Among the aqueducts that supplied the Esquiline Hill, the only one that could run at such a height, more than 50 meters above sea level, was the Aqua Iulia, built by Agrippa during or slightly after his aedileship in 33 before Christ, which brought a general renewal of the entire water system of Rome. In the same year, Micinas created his gardens. Even though their exact extent cannot be defined, the area immediately around the spot where the Fredis founded Laocoön certainly belonged to the Orti Mecenatiani. When the Orti were laid out, the old city walls were completely deprived of their original function. We might speculate that the embankment behind the walls could have carried the branch of the new aqueduct, which, before continuing towards the valley, watered the new gardens. We must remember that Micinas and Agrippa, of course, were both close collaborators and friends of Augustus. In the Imperial period, the Trojanic system of the Sette Sale was inserted in this embankment in order to supply Trajan's baths. The Sivan halls are 9. During the Middle Ages, the upper part of the Sette Sale was buried, and it was in these grounds that the aforementioned house was built. The current layout belongs to the period of modern urbanization. That is now. At the end of the 19th century, the almost rural landscape here was massively altered by the construction of the new residential Esquiline quarter. The excavations frequently brought to light walls, paintings, tombs, statues, and more, as we see in some photos taken by contemporary archaeologists, such as Parker, for example, which also reveal the extent of the ground leveling. You see the massive leveling. When Micinas died in 8 BC, he left his property to Augustus. The luxury and wealth of this estate made it a suitable imperial residence, similar to the highly praised Campanian villas. When the future Emperor Tiberius returned to Rome in 2 AD, after his voluntary exile on Rhodes, he took up residence just in the Orti Mecenatiani. We must remember that the names of the three Rhodian artists that Pliny mentions as the sculptors of the Laocoon are the same as those inscribed on the marble statues from Sperlonga in southern Latium, which were found in a villa long attributed to the Emperor Tiberius. It is therefore likely that the Rhodian artists who sculpted both the statues of Sperlonga and the Laocoon could in some way have been in the service of Tiberius, who, as we mentioned, lived for a long time on Rhodes. The Laocoon would thus have been created for Tiberius for a setting in the garden of Maecenas where he lived. The extreme similarity of the Sperlonga sculptures with the Laocoon is evident. Moreover, other Rhodian sculptures were found on the Esquiline, such as the head of this centaur or Silenus. Against all of these, some scholars, for example, Salvatore Settis, who is here in London, I know, date the Laocoon group slightly earlier to sometime in the period from 40 to 20 BC. If we accept this dating, the group would have been part of a design developed by Maecenas himself in the years when he was laying out his gardens. In either case, then, the Laocoon would never have been moved from its original location. The domus of the Princeps Titus, mentioned by Pliny but otherwise unknown, could have been the very same residence in the garden of Maecenas, without doubt worthy of a prince, which was also where Tiberius had lived before becoming emperor. There are no archaeological remains in this zone we have attributed to the vineyard of the Fredis. However, remains found fairly close by present the same orientation as the Fredis house. This suggests that it is possible that the foundation of the building made use of ancient structures, and it is therefore probable that the Laocoon group was originally situated in a building backing up to the old city wall and provided with water. Something really similar to this. This is the nearby auditorium of Maecenas. You can imagine something like this. The Laocoon have formed part of a complex decorative program, similar to the one at Sperlonga, perhaps standing amongst other sculptures linked to the saga of Troy, Cassandra, Menelao, and so on. Indeed, in his second life in the Belvedere courtyard in Vatican, Laocoon enjoyed a similar scenographic arrangement. And this is now, oops. The elaborate setting in its original scenographic context would have made the subsequent removal of the statue extremely difficult. If we then examine the circumstances in which the Laocoon was discovered, practically intact but with various lacunae, the best explanation is that the rooms in which it stood had become abandoned and subsequently collapsed, causing some damage and loss to the sculpture. The Laocoon is not the only statue to have been found almost intact in the rich depths of the Esquiline. So you see, in addition to the numerous discoveries made during Renaissance excavation, which, like the Laocoon, still need to be precisely located on the ground, many sculptures, such as these, were found during the late 19th century construction works, and now they are on show at the Capitoline Museums in Rome. Ludwig Pollack, that is an archaeologist and an antiquities dealer at the beginning of the 20th century, find in 1905 the Laocoon's missing arm. He saw it in the shop of a Roman stonecutter on the Via Lapicana and identified it as belonging to the Laocoon, or, as he thought, to a copy of the Laocoon. He was told that the arm had been unearthed in the neighboring area. In the years immediately prior to this, in around 1903, works had taken place precisely on the enclosure wall and property of the sisters of Cluny. And it's therefore quite likely that it was during these that the find was made. So you see, here you see the reason, the arm. To conclude, I would like to stress that these results would not have been possible without a profound and positive collaboration between scholars from different disciplines. The find of the individual document, whatever its importance, would have remained an isolated curiosity if we had not been able to place it in the territorial context to which it belonged. All of the carefully collected archival data have been related to each other and have found clarification and confirmation only at the moment in which they were transferred and placed within the landscape, thus reconstructing the ancient panorama and its vicissitudes. The very terrain of this part of the city has preserved stratified signs of these events. This confirms, once again, that the study of the ancient city cannot disregard the analysis of its later history. Only through the reconstruction of the Rome of the 16th century, mapped on the 18th century plan of knowledge, have we been able to cast light on the Rome of the Augustan age. And so we return again to the subject, the focus of our discussion, that Laocoon, that is so famous and well known to almost everyone, that we found in school textbooks, and which also become a modern icon. Even in the world of advertising. Thank you.